Amazing. We're back. So this is the third episode of section 2 of our mini series. And we're going to do something even more specific and give you some tools to navigate a given situation that I think so many women can relate to. And even if you can't relate to this exact situation, we're going to give you some tangible tools and advice that is really going to help you with any situation involving conflict. You have to go into a very uncomfortable conversation. What are the sorts of things that you can do to prepare yourself both mentally and physically? So can you start us off?
Like, conflict is such a natural thing that is going to happen both in the workplace, in any industry. But I think it's really around how do we control everything that is within our control and not and really set ourselves up for success so that we don't completely spiral going into the situation. Before we go into things that you can do, like, we had a lot of great feedback from our episode around like things, listen to this before you quit. And I think that this is a direct extension of that. Coaching up and managing up is a very real and a very regular situation that's going to happen in the workplace. However, for women in particular, it's very difficult to do because we are consumed with, well, what is that person thinking? What is my team going to think of me? Am I saying all of the right things? Do they even think that I'm competent? All of those things happen in our mind before we go into even that conversation. So before we go into like, what could you do if you're in this particular scenario? I want to take out and kind of piecemeal what's happening if I'm in the situation and I'm about to go into a conversation with my boss or a manager, whatever it may be, upper leadership. I really want to talk about how they're micromanaging me and my team. I want to kind of unpack what it could look like to operate differently. Before I go into that conversation, what is already happening in my body? Like, I'm nervous about it. So what's happening prior going into that?
Yeah, well, I mean, people tend to have two sides of the spectrum. So either they shift into anxiety mode, which is, accelerated heart rate. Maybe they're sweating. Maybe it's really hard to collect your thoughts and keep a focus of what you want to communicate. And yeah, usually a lot of tension in your muscles, particularly across your neck. You're essentially going into a scenario of fight or flight, but you've decided to stay and fight. So your body is shifted into that mode. And on a more biological level, it shuts down your digestive system. You're ready to run, you're ready to use your muscles, you get flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, your stress hormone. So it's shifting you into this higher sense of alertness, which if you're aware of that, can be helpful. You are a little bit quicker on your feet. And if you have a lot of clarity about exactly what you want to communicate and what you don't want to go into, it could be used to your advantage. Other people might shift into, you're essentially in freeze or, like more of a depressive, like not feeling empowered to take the exact action and really shutting down and going into all the reasons that this is your fault, turning it on yourself, opposed to getting ready to argue why it's not your fault. I would getting both of these spectrums, neither extreme is really going to help you get a good resolution on what your a difficult conversation. You kind of want to take a little bit of humility and understanding around yourself of what's going on in the physical body. And then you want to maybe try and do a little bit of that for the other person. Like, what were their intentions? Why might they be doing this? What are they maybe seeing differently? So that you can ultimately not go into the meeting with either of those extreme physical experiences and really go a little bit more open-hearted, compassion, and a real interest in finding a solution that feels good to both parties.
I think those last pieces are so, like, those are just gold. Like you have to understand that that other person is also showing up to that. They're micromanaging for a reason. They've experienced X, Y, and Z that has brought them to a space of, this is how I'm showing up for you and your team. And I think the second part is like where we actually want to get to a solution. If I'm going into the meeting, I want to get to a point where I have a little bit more freedom and autonomy with my team, or as, you know, middle management, whatever it may be. In order to do that, I can't show up to this meeting with my boss to completely like go off the rails on how this is terrible, all of these things, because that then the purpose of that meeting is just you venting versus the purpose of the meeting being, I want to come to a solution where I have a little bit more autonomy and a little bit more freedom with me and my team. So I think taking all of those things into account, which I think are so critical to like whatever works for you. If you want to talk through it, maybe you want to, we talked about this in the last episode. Maybe you want to role play this with a colleague, or maybe you want to journal about it, or maybe you want to practice in the shower, whatever it may be. Do that. But a very simple low level thing that I think you should do is, even if you are calling the meeting, or especially if you are calling the meeting, is have a set agenda laid out for you and your boss to talk about. You're in control. And when you start to feel this like heart rate rising, you start to feel, you know, these very physical responses, you have something that you can go back to that can keep you grounded and continue going through. So definitely, if you are going into a conversation, not just having that solution in play, go into it with a meeting. I mean, with like a meeting agenda, even if it's just a conversation, that will absolutely keep you grounded and keep you focused on, let's get to a solution, and not just getting stuck in, you know, how you're feeling, how they're feeling.
Emotions, yeah.
Yeah. I think the second part of that is, and you mentioned that, Megan, is like recognizing that the other person is also a person. They're showing up to this space from their own lived experiences, both personal and professional. So I think starting with like recognizing, hey, naming a few areas or naming a few examples, even if you have to really work to find these examples of how they have helped you get to where you're at. Like, I think everybody wants to start off with a positive. Everyone wants to hear about how they've been helpful. Like, hey, you know, I know I've been working with you for the last 3 or so years, and you've really supported me to get to this role. You've coached me and given me that really critical feedback that I need. Other things where that work style works. Start with the positive, ground yourself in the positive, and also give them a little ego boost before you go in and like ask for what you're going to ask for. And I think that the ask is important, that going in and telling somebody is a very different feeling for how they're receiving it versus asking for it. So I think if you're able to think of your question before you go into the meeting, allows you to set yourself in purpose. Like, what do you want? Do you want autonomy with your team? Okay. So you could possibly like frame your question in a way that says, what would it look like to have 2 team meetings a week where it's just me and my team, and I'm able to get their feedback on X project that we're working on before we meet with you? Like, that's a very specific example where, one, you're not now raising the blood pressure and the heart rate of the other person that you're talking to, because you're like, can you please just get away? Which is really what you're asking. But if you frame it in the form of a question, it really is.
And a clear strategy, a solution, not just an accusation.
Yes. And in that way, you are doing 2 things. One is you're framing it in a way where they have to respond, because you're saying it in the form of a question versus like, oh, let me think about it. Or, hey, I feel like you're not doing this. Then they can be like, okay, well, I'm going to think about it, or not respond, or also have a very not healthy response to where you want to take this conversation. So frame it in the form of a question.
Probably a knee-jerk response too, right? Like
Totally.
defensive.
Like, you're in our meetings too often. I need you out of here. This is what, and that's what typically happens. Like, my team has told me, everyone is saying that you're taking up too much time in this, or you're in all of our meetings. Like, nothing's going to come out of that. Nothing's going to come out of that. But if you go in, you frame it in the form of a question, and you make it time bound, like, you want to support the person that you are asking to envision that your request is completely doable. Like, oh, you want me to be out of these 2 meetings a week? Sure. Like that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And that's how you want the other person to feel.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, managing conflict really comes down to recognizing that there are always 2 people that are in this relationship, and you may not be able to control every component of how that person responds, but you can control how you're showing up, how you feel, and how you respond. And if you can set yourself up for success by having that agenda, having the question set, having your purpose set, and having a very clear outcome. So you ask that question, and then ask them for feedback on what they think about your ask. Don't say, so can you do that? Like, can you not come to this meeting? Because again, that's going to trigger them.
What are your thoughts?
What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that we should frame it differently? What do you think the team needs? And this also becomes a working relationship, and it's, you're providing your leadership team, your upper management, your direct boss, your director, whatever it may be, with some indirect feedback, because then they're also like, oh, okay, like I can do this. But you're also practicing getting those at-bats in of showing up as a leader, both for you and your team. Because if you're asking for a little bit more autonomy, you absolutely need it. And your team is probably like, well, I'm not going to say that when they're on the call. And then they get off the call and then they're like, okay, so this is what I really think. Like, it's more time for everyone. And you being able to advocate that is what is going to allow you to fully step into being a leader for your team, without completely triggering your boss, and creating a very toxic work environment.
Yeah, I mean, like, you don't want to spook the bear, right? Like, you want to maybe not hug the bear, but, be very strategic in how you make the relationship one that's going to get what you want out of that given interaction, but that doesn't damage also moving forward the similar. In fact, ultimately, conflict is an invitation to build deeper connection with somebody. So once
Totally.
you've navigated these kinds of conversations a few times, particularly with a specific individual, it gets easier, and you feel this less of all those things that I described. And I just wanted to say, when you find yourself, the body goes into a constriction mode, just take a few deep breaths. It's so simple, but it really just, bring in the oxygen into all those cells and make sure that you feel grounded before you walk into the room.
Yeah. And I think, as we close here, is going back to what you said in the beginning of like knowing why are you going into this conversation? Why are you going into this? Because most of the time when people go into a conversation to address an issue or address a problem, they may not actually know what they want. And this is in any relationship, right? Are you arguing to argue, or are you arguing because we have to like come up with a clear solution? And if you are able to come up with that solution before you go in to address the problem, it makes conflict feel normal, right? Like the tension is there, but we can work through it because you've already come up with the solution. You have the answer. Most of the time people go into these conflict solutions or conflict-based conversations without the answer. So it's just 2 people that are having a very like a visceral reaction to the conversation that's happening with no solution. And you're just going back and forth, and it's a lot of emotions. It's triggering both people in the room. So the more that you can understand, what do you actually want? What do you want as a leader? What do you need for your team? And go in and ask for that in a very real way that gets you that response. You're able to navigate conflict seamlessly.
Yeah. And I think just one emphasis there is how you present your solution is also important. You need to be authentically open to it being a conversation and something that you can adapt to some degree. And all this goes back to humility. Like the example of, okay, you're going into a conversation, I'm usually coaching people more in personal conflict in their relationships. What do you really want? Be real with yourself. Do you actually want out of this relationship in some way?
Yeah.
Is this a situation that you don't have an out, but you want to feel better about like what is your goal, and just being very honest with yourself instead of it just operating from a place of ego
Mm,
will always be more effective when it comes to navigating conflict.
totally. Totally. And that's this like you're saying, it's with every relationship. It's two people coming together. They're going to respond, whether it's in a romantic, loving relationship, whether it's a work relationship, whether it's a new relationship. People are people and they're going to show up through their lived experiences, their internal triggers, like all of those things show up. The more that you can be aware of that, both what you can do as a leader. But I think a lot of, especially in corporate spaces, the leadership role for a woman is a lot of not just managing their team and people that they probably have a lot of trust in and likely like love in a very working and healthy way, but it's managing up to the people that are above them and creating this like very like healthy relationship across all parties, even though you may have stepped into something where it didn't previously exist. And that's really where you can find just people feeling happy at work, people feeling like, hey, I can give you feedback and it feels natural. There's conflict or disagreement, no problem. That when that feels normal and that feels like a regular cadence and it doesn't feel like you're having this physical reaction to conflict, I think that's a marker and an indicator that you are really fully stepping into yourself as a leader, not just because you can handle conflict well, but because you are so self-aware of who you are and how you're showing up to those situations, that it comes easy to you. And that's what you want it to feel, because you don't want to go in freaking out about these conversations you have to have, because they're for good reason and for good people.
Yeah, and I'll just quickly say, I think this is why corporations want more women in leadership. We are generally better at these sorts of the finesse, the
Totally.
nuance, the managing emotions, not like suppressing them, but having authentic conversations. It's just more natural to us if we allow ourselves to feel into it and build these tools so we
Yeah.
feel safe doing it.
Love it.
Beautiful. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you.